It is the biggest organised protest in the world. If you are wondering why the farmers are protesting, please keep watching. Agriculture is one of the most important sectors of the Indian economy. Its growth and development affects a number of people. It's like a domino effect. Let me show you. Let's say, for example, if the farmer grows wheat, this is then turned into flour at the mill, which is then bought by a family or a business such as a pizza shop. If the farmer has not produced enough wheat, then not enough flour is produced by the mill, so the consumer will have to pay more for flour. This means less disposable income to use in other sectors of the economy and vice versa. While the total production and productivity is constantly increasing, it is essential to provide the farming community with improved marketing facilities with a suitable infrastructure in order to enable them to get a good price for their produce. So how was this achieved? Raw cotton was the first farm produce to attract the attention of the government. British rulers wanted raw cotton to be available at a reasonable price to the textile mills of Manchester. The first regulated market was the Karanja Cotton Market in 1886. The first legislation was the Berar Cotton and Grain Market Act of 1887. Berar was a province in British India. The Act allowed a British resident to declare any place in their assigned district, for example Berar, to form a market for sale and purchase of agricultural produce, and form a committee to supervise the regulated market. The Act became the model for enactment in other parts of the country. In 1928, the Royal Commission on Agriculture recommended the establishment and regulation of markets. This was done by establishing market yards in the countryside and regulating trade. A model bill was created in 1938, but not much happened until independence. Prior to independence, the major concern of the government policy related to agricultural marketing was to keep the price of food low for the consumer and keep the agro raw materials for the industry in check. After independence, farmers were given incentive prices to increase the production of agricultural commodities. The government recognized the cost involved for farmers, for example, undue low prices, higher cost of marketing, and considerable physical losses of the produce in the agricultural marketing system. The government developed well laid out market yards for agricultural produce. These became mandatory. So here's a quick recap. The Berar Cotton and Grain Market Act of 1887 allowed a British resident to set up a regulated market in a certain area which was monitored by a committee. In 1928, the Royal Commission on Agriculture recommended the establishment and regulation of marketing practices. In 1938, a bill was created. This wasn't followed until after independence. Pre-independence, the government wanted to keep the prices of food low for the consumer and keep the agro-raw materials for the industry in check. Post-independence, they wanted to increase production by providing farmers with incentive prices. They acknowledged farmers' costs and made regulated markets mandatory. During the 60s and 70s, most of the states put into operation the Agricultural Produce Markets Regulation, also known as the APMR. All states except Kerala, Jammu and Kashmir and Manipur enacted such laws. The Agricultural Produce Market Committee, also known as the APMC, was established to frame the APMR. The APMC provides farmers with a physical platform known as a mandi. The mandi is where the farmer can market their produce, regulate the sale of produce, and collect market fees for it. The mandi ensures that farmers are not exploited and forced to sell produce at a loss by providing a minimum support price. MSP was introduced in the 60s when India was food deficient. The government wanted to increase production of commodities. Dr. Norman Borlaug, an American biologist, came to India to introduce the Green Revolution, which was the production of high-yielding wheat and rice. Punjab was selected by the government due to its reliable water supply and history of agricultural success. Farmers were reluctant to try this new high-yielding crop due to the initial cost of cultivation, which included breeding plants, developing an irrigation system, and financing fertilizer and agrochemicals. Farmers wanted a minimum price guarantee, and this is where minimum support price was introduced. The farmer goes to the APMC Mandi, which is government-run, to sell their produce via auction. If the open market has less price than the cost incurred by the farmer, the government will pay MSP. MSP ensures the farmer's cost of harvest has been covered and that the farmer is able to make a minimum profit for his produce, if not more. MSP is 1.5 times the cost of production. How is cost calculated? So cost includes A2, which is the cost of seeds, fertilizer, chemicals, hired labour, fuel and irrigation. FL is family labour, and C2 is the rent on the land and money invested in physical assets such as factories, vehicles and machinery. Currently, only A2 and FL is included in the MSP calculation. The government pays MSP on 23 commodities in total. This table shows a set price for 14 commodities. It is issued by the state-run Commission for Agriculture Cost and Price. It shows the A2, FL and C2 costs. This is then followed by the MSP per quintal, which is 100 kilograms, and it's priced in Indian rupees. Final recap. The Agricultural Produce Market Committee, also known as the APMC, was established by the state government of India. APMCs are regulated by the Agricultural Produce Marketing Regulation Act, also known as the APMR. Farmers are safeguarded from exploitation by larger retailers. Farmers sell produce at a mandi set up by the APMC, and farmers have the assurance of a minimum support price. In this video, we'll be discussing the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act. This is a brief summary of the Act. It's part of an 8-page document. If you'd like to read it in full, I'll link it in the description box below. But before we discuss this Act, I'll run through what used to happen before this Act was introduced. We have small farmers who don't always sell to the mandi and would often sell directly to the public or other farmers. The reason being logistically it wasn't cost efficient. This could be due to low crop yield, so it wouldn't be worth their while auctioning their produce, having no storage facilities to stock their produce, and the cost of transporting the produce to the APMC mandi. What we have to bear in mind is that the mandis aren't always close to home. And if the farmer doesn't trade with the APMC, they do not receive help from the state in the form of MSP. Prior to the new Act, medium to large farmers traded only at government-run mandis or APMC yards. Items are sold at auction. If the open market is giving less price for the produce than the cost incurred by the farmer, the government will pay minimum support payment, also known as MSP. MSP ensures the farmer's cost of harvest has been covered and is able to make a minimum profit for his produce, if not more. MSP is usually 1.5 times the cost of production. So what has changed with the introduction of the new Act? The new Act allows farmers to trade outside the APMC and with private companies. They can trade at any place of production, collection, aggregation and online. For example, farm gates, factories, warehouses and cold storage. Different states have different APMC acts. Intra-state trade in commodities falls under the state list and is regulated by the state. Interstate trade falls under the Union list and is regulated by the central government. Under the new Act, farmers can trade intrastate and interstate with no barriers. So how does the new Act affect the farmers? Small farmers wouldn't be affected as they don't sell directly to the mandi. They will continue selling to medium-large farmers. They could sell to the private companies, however the logistics would be the same as selling to the mandi as mentioned before. It wouldn't be worth their while due to low crop yield and the cost involved in storage and transportation to the market yard or the private company. Large farmers presently trade at the mandi and receive MSP, but they can now bypass the APMC mandi and trade with private companies. Therefore, the farmers get more choice as they can trade with APMC mandis as well as private businesses. No barriers, as now they can trade between different states and online, which previously wasn't allowed. No tax, so prior to the Act, the state government would tax agricultural produce that was bought outside of the mandi. And more money, as private businesses could be willing to pay more money than the APMC. However, if they trade with private companies, they won't get MSP, but overall we can see that there are benefits to this Act. So why are the farmers protesting? Farmers see this as another way of the government trying to get out of the farming industry. More choice could mean reduced business at the mandi, leading to their closure, so farmers will be limited as to where they can sell their produce, meaning less choice. The government will introduce tax and fees for private companies at some point in the future, and no mandi means no MSP, and farmers will be at the mercy of private companies, meaning potentially getting less money for their produce. Another concern farmers have is that the private companies are under no obligation to buy or sell a certain amount of produce. This could lead to stockpiling, which is the hoarding of produce. If the company is hoarding goods in a warehouse, it means that they have a high supply of produce. So when the farmer wants to sell his produce, there is too much supply in the warehouse. Therefore, the demand of the produce from the private company is low as they already have it in their warehouse. So the company will offer a reduced price. As there is no MSP, the private company can offer a price lower than the cost of harvest. So the farmer would make a loss. Also, there will be some farmers who have small land holdings, therefore they are worried they will not have enough bargaining power against the private companies. Private companies are looking to make a profit, therefore they will not want to pay high prices. Eventually they would be offering lower price for produce. With no mandi open, the farmers will have no choice but to agree with the private businesses. Here's a quick summary of the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act. The new Act will allow barrier-free trading, which means more choice of where to sell produce, and there is no tax or fines when trading outside the APMC. However, there is a risk of closure of the mandis, meaning a loss of MSP, and private firms may begin hoarding produce so that they could be more profitable, meaning less money for the farmer, and eventually taxation will be introduced for private companies as well. The second Act is the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. This is a snippet of the Act. If you'd like to read the full Act, you'll find the link below. This Act explains itself in the title. We will break this down. It is the farmer's agreement to provide the farmer empowerment and protection. It's a written legal agreement between the farmer and a business. It's done before the production of any produce. This is sometimes known as contract farming. Farming agreements may include trade and commerce agreements or production agreements, or a combination of the two. In a trade and commerce agreement, the ownership of the commodity remains with the farmer during production, and they get the price of the produce on its delivery as per their agreement with the company. In a production agreement, the company agrees to provide farm services fully or partially and make payments to the farmer for their service, regardless of the output. The minimum period of these agreements shall be one crop season, and the maximum period shall be 5 years. So we have discussed that there are two types of agreements. Now we will discuss what these agreements entail. Firstly, we will look at price assurance and what this means. It means the price of the produce is predetermined before production, However, the terms and conditions of the produce are also predetermined, such as the time of supply, quality of the produce, its grade and standard. We have already touched on farm services which are part of the production agreement. Farm services include the supply of seeds, feed, agrochemicals, machinery, technology, and advice. If for some reason the farmer or company is unhappy, then there is a three-level dispute settlement mechanism. Firstly, the matter goes to the conciliation board. If the matter isn't resolved, then the dispute is passed to the subdivisional magistrate, who will make the final decision. If the company or the farmer are not happy with this outcome, they can then appeal. So why are the farmers protesting? Once a farmer enters into a farming agreement with a company, he can no longer buy or sell this farm produce at the state-run mandi. Farmers are scared that companies might not pay them due to excuses like substandard produce. It has happened in the past in the case of sugarcane. Payments were withheld for years. Farmers were left in debt as they were unable to repay loans. Therefore, they had to sell or lose land. In some cases, farmers are committing suicide. Contract farming has destroyed farmers all over the world. The appellate authority is the highest level of appeal for the farmer against any private company. The farmer is unable to go to the Supreme Court or higher. Therefore, the Act is highly skewed in the favour of private companies. Here's a quick summary of the Farmers' Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. The new Act will allow farmers to pre-agree terms prior to production, price is assured before production, and farm services can be provided by the private companies. However, farmers lose out on state regulation and MSP. Once they have signed an agreement with a private firm, they can't approach the state. There's also a risk of non-payment if the terms of produce is not met, and farmers are unable to appeal to the Supreme Court. It is not a new act, but an amendment of an existing act. The Essential Commodities Act was established in 1955 to ensure government regulation of the production, supply, and distribution of the essential commodities to make them available to the consumer at a fair price. The list of items under the Act include drugs, fertilizer, pulses, edible oils, and petrol. The government can include new commodities as and when required and take them off the list once the situation improves. For example, the masks were added to the list at the beginning of the COVID pandemic and removed in July. Some companies may stockpile or hoard produce illegally in warehouses. This means supply is low in the market and creates artificial demand. Therefore, the price of the produce increases, so private companies sell the product at a higher price, meaning more profit. The government can intervene to prevent wholesalers, retailers, or even importers stockpiling beyond a certain quantity, so a product is available at the right price. Traders would have to immediately sell into the market any stocks held beyond the minimum quantity. This increases supply and brings down prices. As not all shopkeepers and traders comply, state agencies conduct raids. The excess stock is then auctioned or sold through fair price shops. So what are the new changes? The government has removed certain commodities such as cereals, pulses, potato, onion, and oils as essential commodities. So the government can regulate their supply and price only in the cases of war, famine, natural calamities, or high price rise. Why are the farmers protesting? The government only regulates stock of item based on rising prices, and then it will add them back to the essential list, but there are conditions. Non-perishable items are items that can be stored at room temperature for a number of months or years, such as pulses, oils, and cereals. The government will only intervene if there is a 50% increase in the retail price of these items. For example, if pulses cost 100 rupees for 1 kilogram, cost needs to increase to 151 rupees then the government will move pulses to the essentials list to start regulating it. For perishables such as potato and onions, it needs to be a 100% increase in retail price before the government will step in. For example, if the potatoes are 50 rupees, then they need to increase to 151 rupees for the government to list it as an essential commodity and therefore regulate it. Also, there is no regulation of stock unless the price changes, meaning there is a high chance of hoarding. That's why prices of these household essentials may increase. Here's a quick summary of the Essential Commodities Act. The new Act will allow farmers to boost their income as items are not price regulated, so private firms would pay more for their produce. However, the new Act has no regulation of the household essentials, which have been removed from this list. Therefore, there is a high risk of hoarding. If the private companies hoard produce, they have less demand for the goods, which may mean less profit for the farmer and increased prices for the consumer if they perceive supply to be low. If you like this video, please like, comment and share, and make sure you subscribe.